Good evening, everybody. This is Pastor Connor with Transcendent Truth Media Network. Just hopping on today, um, somebody who I will name in a second put up today a YouTube video discussing liturgy, particularly, I don't know if I'm allowed to take all the credit here, although I'll take some. It seems like what happened was somebody was reflecting upon the Lutheran liturgy and Luther's German Mass. Maybe this has had something to do with our series on the German Mass. Maybe it hasn't. I don't know. Either way, same idea. Lutheran liturgy, Luther's German Mass, and then reflecting upon these things, upon, in one aspect, the similarities between Roman Catholic liturgical theology and Lutheran liturgical theology, Roman Catholic liturgy and Lutheran liturgy. And as he expressed this to me privately as well in discussion, after he had prepared this video, put it out. This was before I watched it. I have now watched it, and I'll give some remarks about it in a second. Is He was then led to consider not only the similarities, but the differences between Roman Catholics and Lutherans, not only on the liturgy itself, but in the liturgical theology behind it. And now, just another note there, liturgical theology is not a small thing. Liturgical theology and the theology that's behind a liturgy, these are not like, oh, how many supplications do you need in the Kyrie? It's not that kind of thing. What we're talking about, for example, in the specific case of his video and his concerns, have to do with the sacrifice of the Mass. And the theology behind what we understand by sacrifice of the Mass, if we're even willing to use the phrase sacrifice of the Mass, has to do with our understanding of the death of Christ, atonement theology, and how that works itself into our lives in the here and now through the means of grace. Which is everything. Like that's everything. That's the gospel itself. That's the sacraments itself. Basically, his concern, though, it comes from a good place. His concern was, look, we are always focusing upon what is similar between us, especially as ecumenical dialogue between Rome and between the Lutherans has been continuing and been popping off and kicking off and deepening. Is that but the problem he was saying is we're not going to get there unless we are talking about our differences, and that's true. Now, of course, if you come from certain Lutheran churches, the similarities are never mentioned, and everything you're always constantly hearing every single day, every single hour, every single minute is something antichrist. Maybe there's room for that, maybe there's not. I'll leave that to your discretion. But he was basically saying, let's pull the swords back out. Let's pull the guns back out, cock them, and start shooting at one another, because otherwise we're not going to get anywhere in the conversation. And there he's right. And the issue he points to is actually very, very interesting. It's very, very necessary. Because if you go through the Book of Concord, the Lutheran confessions, this issue of the sacrifice of the Mass, this issue of how we understand Christ's death, how we understand the Eucharist, the sacrament of the altar, and what's actually happening there is crucial. So basically, let's start this way. By the way, his video is fantastic. His thoughts are fantastic. His theology is good. It's rigorous. He knows what he's talking about, and he's talking about it in a compelling way, in a fresh way, in a way that is after truth, in an informed way. Like he's read the readings, okay? He knows the fathers, as do I, as should you. And basically that's what this is really a discussion about. That's what this is all couched in, because as he kicks off his video and he kicks off the controversy, he starts talking about the ancient liturgies. And he says basically, obviously everyone knows that Rome has Eucharistic sacrifice theology, and I'll get there in a second myself, talking about that. But he said, we famously like to complain that they have the sacrifice of the Mass as their theology in the way that they do. But he's saying, and yet nobody from your side, from the Lutheran side, is going to the early church fathers and complaining about this. So let's pick it up basically where he starts. Where he starts is with his own Roman Catholic theology. So let's start there. Let's start in the Roman Mass. So as the Roman Mass I guess starts getting into this, of course, there's different options, and so then you're not going to hear all these things in one single mass if you go to a Roman Catholic Church. But just to show you kind of what's in their missal, is it begins with the preparation of the gifts, of the elements for the Lord's Supper. So we begin here. We're talking about offering up this bread. It says, "This bread we offer you." Okay, so there, just as it is, you are seeing that the focus is immediately on what we are bringing literally to the table, right? So to speak, to use a pun. This also is in the Lutheran Divine Service, right? Especially in the offertory. Some offertories are more explicit about it than others, but included there, like in the offertory, is everything that's being brought: ourselves, our time, and our possessions, signs of your gracious love. Of course, that involves the bread and the wine. Now, especially in the early church, and we might look a little bit at early church liturgies, as Ryan in his video was talking about, but we're going to leave that, the in-depth stuff, for the Lutheran Library podcast, because we are going to be doing an entire series on the Church Fathers there. And as the TTM Liturgical Theology book comes out and is released, then of course there will be many, many episodes on liturgy and liturgical theology and all of that, breaking that stuff down for you guys. But just, we might touch on it a little bit, but when you go there to the early church liturgies, of course this is there. Of course this is emphasized. It's emphasized even more than it is in the Lutheran services. And I think there's a reason for that. I think it's probably because we as Lutherans, yes, as Ryan says, we tend to reduce to the gospel. In his view, this is not a good thing. In my view, this is a good thing. In his view, let me just show you kind of how he's thinking, and he's not entirely off here. It's just a question of how should we deliver this? Not how can we. Of course, we can do it, as he's saying. There's nothing wrong with having a stronger emphasis on the gifts we bring. And it's not just the gifts we bring, like the offerings of money, the offerings of ourselves, the offerings of our time. This has to do with the worship of God. I mean, as I'm always saying, reminding people of this. Of course, if you listen to my sermons, you'll hear it a lot, that frequently, about once a month, I like to ask my congregation during the sermon on Sunday morning why they're there. Maybe sometimes more than a month. I've done it almost every week in certain months, right? Why have you come? I did it on Christmas Day. Why are you here? Right? So I asked them what they think church is about. It's rhetorical, of course, because I'm not really going to listen to what they have to say. I'm just going to tell them why they're really there. Sometimes they will answer, and the answer is always worship. And again, it's not wrong. And yet again, in another way, it is kind of wrong, because that is, for example, your wedding day, right? Why'd you show up? Right? You showed up to get married. You did not show up to walk down an aisle. You will walk down an aisle, but you did not show up on your wedding day to walk down an aisle. In the same way, you come to church on Sunday morning to receive the forgiveness of sins in the Word of God, heard, touched, felt, tasted, and drunk, you know? You do not come to worship. You will worship, but that's not why you come. You come to receive from God his good gifts. You do not come to worship. You will worship, right? Just same thing. The reason why you go to the hospital when your newborn baby is there is not to open a door. You will open a door. It's not to open a door that you have come. You have come to meet your newborn baby. Do you see? And so the actual emphasis of what's going on does lead to right or wrong answers. It does lead to black and white issues of difference on how we view things, on how we view importance, on how we view what's going on here. So in this very same way, and this isn't just dealing with liturgics, and of course everything is dealing with theology, liturgical theology, soteriological theology, homiletical theology. I just look at their their homiletics for a second. You go and you listen to some of the best Roman Catholic preachers. Again, they're wonderful speakers. They're compelling orators. They're magnificent thinkers. Robert Bishop Barron, Father Mike Schmidt. There's a younger guy, I forget his name, but similar approach, similar way of speaking, similar compelling delivery. Theologically, it's rich, but the emphasis, in my opinion, it's not right. Because the emphasis in all of these things are about participation and offering up and worshiping. And again, these things are all technically right. So, for example, the Roman Catholic idea in their liturgical theology, but active participation, about coming and drawing and sacrificing yourself, joining yourself to the sacrifice of Christ. Of course, these things are happening, but these things are not the thing, right? They're not the thing. The thing is receiving God's grace. Now, Ryan he's got a lot of this idea pretty right. Because when he's talking about it, he's saying you don't want to reduce it, but you do want to really stick with that understanding that the entirety of the Mass, in his opinion, and what he's saying is it is going back to and representing the once for all sacrifice of Christ. The difference between Ryan and me, and this is also to dispel some errors, some eccentricities of I guess other Lutherans that are out there, and he knows that, he knows all this, but is that yes, there is a Eucharistic sacrifice. It's just the direction between what they're talking about and what we're talking about is different. What the Roman Catholic is talking about is offering it to God. And he did mention that this is, some might say that what's really going on here is a difference on Anselm. I'm probably the guy who's going to say that. That's probably my thesis, just to out my thesis from the beginning here. That's probably where I'm going to end up going with this. And so aside from that, right, he's saying that like this is how we come. We bring this once for all sacrifice of Christ and his pleading of his blood before the Father for our sake, this intercession, this mediation, that he's saying it takes place in the here and now. He also brought up James White, who was saying, yes, this does happen, this kind of mediation, this kind of pleading the blood, this kind of intercession, this kind of atonement intercession happens for you by Christ to the Father, right? And he says it happens in heaven. The Catholics are saying heaven comes down to earth in the Mass. That's why, right, there's really no difference there. I'll admit that. I'll be the first guy to admit that. There's really no difference there. So if you are a Lutheran that has this kind of super hard Anselmian theology, Ryan is right. Your point does not make sense. Your point is incoherent. Now, my response is that that's not exactly how it works, right? My issue here is not with heaven coming to earth in the Mass. My issue is with Anselm itself, himself, really, his theology itself, right? My issue is with the idea that the Father was not in on this, right? Of course, they do say he is, but then the theology becomes this kind of incoherent tongue-in-cheek thing. There's no reality to it, right? But what's really happening in the gospel of Christ is that the Father has sent his Son, given his Son for us, right? And so on one side, we're going to say something is an anthropomorphosis. What would you call it? An anthropomorphization? Anthropomorphization? Whatever you would say, right? So the Roman Catholics are saying that this is happening where it seems like the Father's not in on it. That's just a way of speaking. It's a motif, right? What we would be saying is that it's to do actually with Jesus Christ being offered to the Father, right? Of course, as Ryan said, it's not like the priest is the one offering him himself, because the priest, Roman Catholics say, is operating in persona Christi, and he says Lutherans should accept that too. Yes, we should, right? And so what the priest does is the action of Christ in and through that pastor, right? And so his point, if Anselm was right, it makes total sense. But the problem is Anselm is not right. Anselm is not right. There is a pleading of the blood, right? But who is the one pleading the blood? Or really, is pleading the blood even a useful term? No, it's not, right? Because the blood is the thing that does it, not the pleading, right? The blood already does the thing, not the pleading. The blood comes to us so that we might be participators in it, right? That we might be joined into it. So let me just draw it out for you this way. The way that Roman Catholics are understanding what is happening in the Mass is this Jesus Christ offering the blood to the Father, pleading the blood to the Father as an intercession for your sake to the Father by Christ, your one and only mediator. It's happening now, right? That yes, it's happening in heaven, but it's coming down to earth in the Mass where heaven and earth intersect. And yes, the priest is doing it, but the priest is doing it in the person of Christ as Christ acts through the priest, right? This is so really that's what's happening from the Roman Catholic perspective. But what's happening in the Lutheran perspective is that God is, through his mouthpiece, through his pastor, offering to you this sacrifice that has already happened, that you might partake in and share in its benefits. The direction is different. The Roman Catholic Mass is upward, it's Godward. Something is being offered to God by Christ, right? And you are being joined into that sacrifice as it's being offered to God with all the pleasing things and all the worshipy things and all that. And again, that's not entirely wrong. There is worshipy things happening. It's just that that's not why we come here. It's difference in emphasis. But in Lutheran Catholic liturgical theology, what's happening for Lutherans, not for all of us, but as Lutherans understand to be happening, is that in the divine service, God is coming to earth, right? Again, as you have this intersection between heaven and earth, again, you have this Christ operating through the pastor, through word and sacrament. You have both of that, but the direction is different. And so that one sacrifice for all the blood that's already been realityed, if you will, is coming to you that you might participate in it, right? Both understand participation. Both understand adding ourselves into it. And this is why, and Ryan brought it up as well, because he knows I bring it up. I brought it up in the series on the German Mass. I bring it up all the time, is the reason, this is in John 6 as well as in Exodus, is you can kill the lamb in the Passover, but unless you ate the flesh of that lamb, it's not going to do anything for you. And so you need to participate in that, yes, that once for all sacrifice. That's what it is. But the difference lies here. The difference lies in, is the reality of the thing in the pleading, or is the reality of the thing in the blood? That's the question. That is the question. And the question is Anselm really right in the direction of the sacrifice and of the death of Christ and of the atonement, or is he wrong, right? I mean, this is, in a sense, this is a question for atonement theories, and we do have scheduled an entire series on atonement theories. Everybody who knows me knows, and everybody who listens to this podcast network enough knows, I am a firm believer in the kaleidoscopic perspective, but they also will know I'm not a fan of Anselm. But there we're going to cover Anselm. We're going to cover very hard satisfaction theory. We're going to cover penal substitutionary atonement. We're going to be covering Christus Victor. We're going to be covering ransom theory and liberation theory and healing theory. We're going to be covering moral influence and governance theories of the atonement. We're going to be covering that also. That will cover that, as well as for the patristic liturgies. Yeah, that's going to be covered as well in the Lutheran library as we dig into those books and those liturgies and kind of look at what's happening there. But just to make one, I guess, kind of passing note on those, is that in those liturgies, this is my reading of it. I assume Ryan is reading them a little differently than I am. Is I do not see myself any kind of hard satisfaction theory going on there. What I see is an offering, yes, but an offering that things might be transformed into sacraments. Like that's what you see in the Eastern and the Oriental liturgies that Ryan was referring to. You see the offering of this bread, that this bread might be used by God to make present to us the flesh of Christ, right? But again, listen to the language there. It's not take this bread as well as you take Christ from us. That's not the language. The language is take this bread that you might make it something for us. And so there's a giving and there's a receiving. There's a back and a forth. Do we use that language? No, again, but just as I was saying in the opening statements, is that this has to do with a difference in emphasis. But again, just to come back to this Roman liturgy, kind of listen to the language here. Um, with humble spirit and contrite heart, may we be accepted by you, O Lord. Now, this is language you do see in the early ancient liturgies, but it carries on. It doesn't stop there. It's not just about us being accepted, because the Lutherans would agree with this language as well, that we come before God asking to be accepted. Of course, we are accepted in grace. This is the doctrine of justification. This is the doctrine of God accepting those who are freely unacceptable. But the Romans continue. And may our sacrifice in your sight this day be pleasing to you, Lord God. Again, nothing is actually wrong about that, because as St. Paul talks about sacrifice, he talks about it in the aspect of worship, that this is your reasonable sacrifice, that you keep yourselves pure, that you put away your sin, that you do lots of good works, that you come, and of course you bring your praises, you bring your singing, you bring your worship to God. This is your sacrifice, right? But again, they continue. May the Lord accept the sacrifice of your hands and the praise and glory of his name for our good and the good of his holy church. So again, nothing is actually wrong about this except for the emphasis. And that is really where the Lutherans should be coming down on this issue. Now, when we get to, of course, the atonement theory that's reflected in this, yeah, then we should have a disagreement. But the fact is, not all Lutherans are actually going to disagree with it. Sadly, I think they should, but not all will. But just as we close here, I want to open up a little bit of the confessions to show you kind of where this is all, this as a controversy, why this has held on for so long. It's because it's rooted in our confession of faith. Now, and I'm turning here just to Augsburg Confession, Article 24 on the Mass, and this I think will really help Roman Catholics to understand not only where we are coming from and why this has become such a thing between the two theological traditions, but particularly why this is kind of a, and hear it from me, this is probably gonna piss off both some Roman Catholics and some Lutherans, is that I know Ryan was trying to shift from the ecumenical mode to the polemical mode, but I'm not going to do it here, right? And the reason why is that a lot of this is just not really controversial, and this is why this is real. Let me show you what the controversy was, what the things in the Lutheran confessions are rejecting. An abominable error was also rebuked, namely, the teaching that our Lord Jesus Christ had made satisfaction by his death only for original sin, and had instituted the Mass as a sacrifice for other sins, that is, sins that are not original. We would call it, well, not we, but they, I don't know, maybe we would, as I'm sure some of us would, but actual sins, right? So is that what Ryan is saying? Is that what Roman Catholics, are saying? No, it's not, right? Now, another issue here is moving on to verse 22, and this is again Article 24, Augsburg Confession. Thus the Mass was made into a sacrifice for the living and the dead, for the purpose of taking away sin and appeasing God. And this, I want us to stop here on the appeasing God issue. This has to do really with, this does have to do a lot with Anselm, right? Is that Christ was killed to appease God. Christ is God, right? Let's kind of really understand how the Trinity works together in the life, death, and the resurrection of Christ. Let's try, please, folks, to understand how the Trinity together not only willed for, but made this actually happen. So anyways, but within this verse, we have also this issue of the living and the dead. And that, for example, you would have people whose sins, in a sense, are not forgiven, but ex opere operato, right? This is another controversy, that now unbelievers are having their sins forgiven, or people who, for whatever reason, in the Roman Catholic understanding, are in purgatory and not in heaven because whatever, that their sins are not forgiven. Now, again, Rome has fixed most of these things from our perspective. Right? A lot of these things have been wiped up. They've been clean. They've been moderated. They've been toned down a lot. right? Are we seeing this theology still? Yeah, in some places, but it's not normative really anywhere, right? Now, what we make of Luther's, or sorry, not Luther's, Melanchthon's term here, that it is basically a sin, a way of taking away sin. Well, just as Ryan was saying in his video, anyone who does not believe that that sin is being taken away by the actual life, death, and resurrection of Christ is anathema. That neither Roman Catholics nor Lutherans believe that the Mass is doing something that the life, death, and resurrection did not do, right? But that the Mass, or the word preached for us, or a confession and absolution for both of us, or baptism, as Paul says in Romans 6, unites us to that one act of the life, death, and the resurrection of Christ. So just we'll stop there. And I hope that this has been helpful to Ryan. I hope that this has been helpful to anybody else, and I hope this has maybe piqued your interest a little bit, so that, as we continue moving forward, talking about these things and these different sources that come up, on Confessing Concord, on Lutheran Library, as we discuss liturgy on Blood and Bone, um, moving forward into 2023 and 2024, as the New Wittenberg Press, that's the publishing arm of Transcendent Truth Media, as that service book for New Wittenberg Press comes out, as that liturgical theology book for New Wittenberg Press comes out, and that's discussed more, that this, you can come back here, you can come back to that 5-part series on Luther's German Mass. You can go back to Ryan's video, and that this will, I guess, help you to move forward and develop your understanding of these things in an ecumenical way. Sorry, Ryan, I didn't get very polemical, but I don't think we're really able to, right? I don't think that this is really the area for us to be doing that, unless you want to really be getting into differences in atonement theory. But then even Lutherans are going to end up being split. So anyways, I hope that's helpful. Yeah, so just to recap, the divine service, the Eucharist, Holy Communion, is, yes, it is about the sacrificed Lamb of God once for all that happened 2,000 years ago, right? On that altar, not being, in our opinion, not being offered to God, but being given to you that you might partake in it. That's it, right? And if that view is unacceptable to the Roman Catholics, I'm not sorry. But what I would say is that we as Lutherans should not look at what they are talking about as entirely repugnant, because a lot of what they're saying is true. The difference is the emphasis, but that does not mean that a difference in emphasis is not an error. It is an error, right? So again, you don't go to a wedding to walk down an aisle. You don't go to visit your newborn in order to open a door or sit in a chair, right? To say those things, though they are technically right, you are really ending up with the wrong position. Anyways, that will be my closing statement. God bless you all. Have a happy Monday and a blessed Tuesday.